Today, let's explore sci-fi and fantasy of yesteryear on this episode of Out Loud Geek. Hi, and welcome to another edition of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss a variety of topics, including science fiction, fantasy, cooking, the outdoors, and more. In this first ever episode of our exploration of sci-fi and fantasy of yesteryear, today's topic will be the 1960s fantasy sitcom known as Bewitched. The show premiered on September 14th, 1964, and its final episode aired on March 25th, 1972. Hence, it ran for 8 years with 254 episodes, which is a very good run for any TV show. The show's premise was that a mortal, purely human man named Darin Stevens, who was first played by the actor Dick York, becomes married to a very attractive blonde witch named Samantha, who was played by the actress Elizabeth Montgomery. Initially, Darin doesn't know that Samantha is a witch, but she confides this to him in the show's premiere episode. She also agrees to live a mortal life with Darin and to refrain from using her natural witchcraft abilities. Naturally, situations periodically occur that require Samantha to use her witchcraft, though it still bothers Darin, and it's typically only done when there's no other viable solution to a current sticky situation. Unfortunately, the actor Dick York started to become increasingly ill, so much so that he had to leave the show after the end of its 5th season. But show producers, wanting the show to go on, decided to replace him with another actor, Dick Sargent, who then took over the role of Darin Stevens for the remainder of the show's run. Samantha also had parents. Her mother, Endora, who was played by the actress Agnes Morehead, was introduced in the show's premiere episode, and, like Elizabeth Montgomery, Morehead appeared in every episode of the series during its entire run. In fact, she and Montgomery were the only actors to appear in every episode of the series. Endora was a more powerful witch than Samantha, and she was not too pleased when Samantha married the mortal Darin. Initially, she remained invisible to Darin, but she finally agreed to meet him during the show's 4th episode. When they met, it didn't take long for the two to realize just how much they disliked each other. This set the stage for their ongoing mutual animosity, which would become a major plot element during the entirety of the series. Whenever Endora visited Samantha, to show her animosity towards Darin, she'd rarely ever refer to him by name. Instead, she'd call him things like Donald, Durwood, what's his name, or some other insulting name. Endora also enjoyed casting a variety of spells on Darin that would typically affect his overall personality. Sometimes this was to show Samantha why she shouldn't be married to him, or it was purely out of spite. Either way, Darin having a spell cast upon him was a very common episodic plot element, either from Endora or one of Samantha's other relatives or witchly acquaintances. Samantha's father, Maurice, who was played by the actor Maurice Evans, was a far less frequent visitor to the Stevens household, as he only appeared in 12 of the show's 254 episodes. Being slightly more powerful than Endora, Maurice was referred to as a warlock, not as a witch. He had an intense love for Shakespearean plays and would periodically quote from them. He also had an immense love for his daughter Samantha and would do anything to protect her. Like Endora, he didn't like Darin and would also refer to him with insulting names. He also periodically casted spells onto Darin. By the way, if you think Maurice's voice sounds familiar, it may be because he also played Dr. Zaius in Planet of the Apes. Before introducing other cast members, let's examine what witches and warlocks in Bewitched could do with their witchcraft. In a nutshell, they could perform feats of telekinesis, telepathy, levitation, conjuration, teleportation, transfiguration, augmentation, spells and hexes, as well as potion making. So there wasn't really that much that they could not do, provided that they were in good health and had their full powers. How would a witch or warlock invoke the use of their witchcraft? The three main methods that a witch or warlock would use to invoke their witchcraft in Bewitched was to use special hand and arm movements, or specifically in the case of Samantha, wiggle her nose, or to speak in a commanding and lyrical voice to cast a spell or a hex. Occasionally, a special tool might be used, but wands were never used in Bewitched. An act of witchcraft in Bewitched would be noticeable to the audience in one of the following ways. An audible dinging sound would be heard to signify that a successful use of witchcraft had just occurred. An audible sputtering or a broken spring sound would be used to signify that an attempted but failed use of witchcraft had just occurred. If a witch or warlock was attempting to cast a spell or a hex, audible tinkling chimes would be heard. An explosive sound with smoke and lights flashing would signify a grand entrance or exit. Now let's return to viewing the show's individual cast members. Like Darin himself, his parents were both mortals, and they didn't know anything about witchcraft. Darin's mother, Mrs. Phyllis Stevens, was played by Mabel Albertson, but two different actors played Darin's father, Mr. Frank Stevens. The first actor was Frank F. Simon, who appeared in 5 episodes between 1964 and 1967, then once in 1971. The second actor was Roy Roberts, who appeared in 7 episodes between 1967 and 1970. Thus, there was some overlap between the two. Of Darin's parents, Frank was by far the more sensible of the two. Phyllis, though, was the most likely to see witchcraft occurring, which would often cause her to say, "Frank, I'm getting a sick headache." Phyllis was also a bit of a busybody and tried to pry frequently into Darin and Samantha's marriage. When Endora was also present, she'd flirt with Frank just to annoy Phyllis, who she didn't like. A very important ongoing plot element during the series was that Darin and Samantha always kept the fact that she and her relatives were witches and warlocks a secret. They never wanted any mortals, including Darin's parents, from ever finding out. Another major character in the series was Darin's boss named Larry Tate, who was played by the actor David White. Larry's wife was named Louise Tate, and she was portrayed by 2 different actresses. The first actress to portray Louise was Irene Vernon from 1964 to 1966 for 13 episodes. The second actress was Casey Rogers from 1966 to 1972 for 33 episodes. Larry Tate was a partner at an advertising agency named McMahon & Tate. Darin's job at McMahon & Tate was to come up with advertising campaigns for various clients. He and Samantha would frequently have dinner parties for clients, which would often include Larry and sometimes Louise. Louise became good friends with Samantha. Larry was also an annoying yes man when it came to always trying to please clients. Darin and Samantha moved from their apartment to a new house on Morning Glory Circle in the second episode of the series. Their new neighbors across the street were Abner and Gladys Kravitz. Actor George Tobias portrayed Abner, but 2 different actresses portrayed Gladys. The first actress to portray Gladys was Alice Pearce. Sadly, while filming was occurring during the second season of the show in early 1966, Pearce was diagnosed with a terminal disease and died shortly thereafter. To make up for her untimely death, Actress Mary Grace Canfield was brought in to play Abner's sister Harriet for 4 episodes towards the end of the second season. Eventually, Alice Pearce was replaced with Sandra Gould to take over the role of Gladys, and did so for the remainder of the series. The character of Gladys was the stereotypical nosy neighbor, who enjoyed spying on the Stevens' home from hers, walking over and peeking through the windows, and periodically asking to borrow sugar to gain entry into the house to see what was occurring. She frequently saw acts of witchcraft occurring inside of the Stevens' home, causing her to run, scream, and call out to Abner. But Abner never believed her stories, wanting instead to simply read a newspaper or play his flute. Gladys was a hilarious character throughout the series. Darin and Samantha had 2 children during the show. The oldest, Tabitha, who was played jointly by the twins Aaron and Diane Murphy, appeared in at least 95 episodes from 1966 to 1972. Initially, Tabitha could start to perform so-called unintentional witchcraft. Later, as she grew older, Tabitha could perform her own witchcraft. Darin and Samantha tried to explain to Tabitha not to do witchcraft, especially not in front of mortals, but she didn't always understand that. She was adored by Endora and Maurice, as well as everyone else, and was a great addition to the show. Much later in the series, Darin and Samantha had a second child, a son whom they named Adam, who was played jointly by the twins David Mandelblock and his brother Greg Lawrence in at least 17 episodes from 1970 to 1972. Though his powers were not as powerful as Tabitha's, he was born a warlock. His character didn't get to develop as fully as that of Tabitha, though, due to his very young age and the ending of the show in 1972. Several other noteworthy recurring characters would appear regularly over the course of the series. The first of these was Samantha's Aunt Clara, who was played by the actress Marion Lorne and appeared in 28 episodes from 1964 to 1968. Aunt Clara was an adorable and endearing character who loved to collect doorknobs as a hobby. Due to her more advanced age, her ability to use witchcraft had waned and would often lead to unpredictable results that would persistently upset Darin. Aunt Clara would then try to remember what the reverse spell was in order to undo her unintended mistake, which she'd eventually do. Her landings and takeoffs were also not particularly graceful, as she'd either go through the chimney or walk into a wall. Regardless, Aunt Clara's sweet nature was always a welcome and endearing part of the show. She not only loved Samantha, she was also quite fond of Darin. Sadly, the actress Marion Lorne died in the spring of 1968, and because there was simply no one else who could possibly take over the role that had become so uniquely hers, the show's producers decided to instead create an entirely new character who was also a bumbling witch, Esmeralda. Esmeralda was played by the actress Alice Ghostley and appeared in 16 episodes from 1969 to 1972. Esmeralda became the Stevens' infrequent maid and babysitter. Her witchcraft was both unpredictable and sometimes accidental due to a sneeze. When she became nervous, she turned partially or fully invisible. Though she was never as endearing as Aunt Clara, her mistakes always provided great entertainment. Following Aunt Clara's replacement with Esmeralda, neither the character nor her disappearance were ever mentioned again during the remainder of the show. There are 3 more noteworthy recurring characters that need to be mentioned. First, there was Samantha's Uncle Arthur, who was a prankster and a practical joker. He was played by Paul Lynde and appeared in 11 episodes from 1965 to 1971. Then there was Dr. Bombay, who wasn't related to Samantha, but was the family's witchly doctor. He was played by the actor Bernard Fox and appeared in 19 episodes from 1967 to 1972. Finally, there was Samantha's hippie cousin Serena, who was played by Elizabeth Montgomery herself and appeared in 27 episodes between 1967 and 1972. Given that Bewitched was on the air for 8 years and 254 episodes, what factors contributed to the success of this bewitching fantasy series? We'll start from one of our most recent videos that was entitled, How Important is Suspension of Disbelief? In spite of the series experiencing multiple casting changes due to illness, death, and unavailability, the show's producers and writers clearly made a conscious effort to ensure that the show maintained an internally consistent fictional world. This was the primary requirement that J.R.R. Tolkien stated was essential for a writer to establish and maintain so that an audience could not only be able to suspend their disbelief, but also to be able to form secondary belief, which Tolkien defined as an audience's ability to perceive that what they are experiencing is true within the context of the fictional world's secondary reality created by the writers. When watching various episodes of Bewitched, regardless of what actor was playing which character, each episode was indeed internally consistent within the show's fictional world. No retconning ever occurred during the series, nor were there any major changes in any one character's personality or behavior. Individual episodic plots could vary widely in terms of what was happening, but how the characters responded to those situations and how acts of witchcraft occurred were entirely consistent. Had the series not maintained this consistency throughout its 8 years of production, it would never have been as successful or long-running as it had been. Nor would it be as successful years later as it continues to be shown and viewed in syndication more than 50 years after the show originally premiered. Another factor that likely contributed to the show's long-running success was that the stories that were presented in each episode rarely addressed socio-political issues of the day. This allowed each episode to be more of an escape for the audience. Another factor that likely contributed to the show's success was how realistic each of the characters came across, including how well audience members could identify with those characters and the issues that each character faced. For example, how many real-life spouses have problematic relationships with in-laws, and in particular with their mothers-in-law? That's a universal issue that many face on a daily basis that was ever present during each episode of Bewitched. Thus, the show had broad appeal within the familiar setting of a typical family, combined with the audience's ability to easily maintain their suspension of disbelief with the show's inclusion of the witchcraft fantasy element. Thank you for watching today. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to press the like button below, and if you'd like to see more of our videos in the future, please subscribe to our YouTube channel right now by clicking on the subscribe button. If you'd like to leave a comment, please feel free to post one below. See you next time on Out Loud Geek.